Let's bring in our next guest, Jordan Horrobin of NorthStar Bets. When you, in a few months' time, when the Jays are looking back at this first third of the season, especially the month of May, how do you think they'll be looking back at it?
I think they're going to hopefully look back at it as the worst month of the season and a month that they learned a lot from. I mean,
Yeah.
A guy like Kiermaier, I could see him waxing poetically in September about how May was a month of growth and a month where they learned a lot. And of course, I'm putting words in his mouth right now, but that's what they would like to have happen, because this month has been a nightmare. I mean, you guys had it up on the screen there that they're in last in the AL East, and they did themselves no favors in that regard this month, going 2-13 against this division. And of course, yes, it's the best division in baseball, but if you're the worst of the best, that's not good enough, right? So they missed a lot of good chances this month to gain ground in the division. But hey, we're only 1/3 of the way home. A lot of games left.
Yeah, listen, I'm sure we'll get to more negatives shortly, but let's try and be somewhat positive right now. Looking forward, what is the main reason to be positive if you're a Jays fan?
I think you look at a guy like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. A lot of what this team is and does it starts with him, and he's struggling right now. But I think there should be belief, just in terms of what he's done in recent years, that this is not him, and his numbers will bounce back. And when he's going, it helps the whole lineup go. So, even with George Springer, we saw early on in the season, he was really struggling. He's been way better recently. And if Vlad can kind of get back into form again, you're not usually going to have all guys firing on all cylinders together. But with him, I mean, he drives a lot of this offense. So I think looking at him and looking at sort of where he can be and what his ceiling is, that's one of the biggest rays of hope, I think, for this team right now.
Yeah, I see that. In comes Rowdy Tellez, right? He's got 12 home runs in the season, more than Vladdy right now. Listen, there's so much speculation as to what's wrong with Vladdy throughout May. What is the Jordan Horrobin breakdown of exactly what's wrong with Vladdy in May and how that will improve?
Yeah, I think him and Rowdy have the same number of home runs at Rogers Center this year, too. So wow. That's not so good. But I would say the breakdown that I have with Vlad is just he's chasing a lot. He's chasing way more than we've seen him, especially in 2021, but a lot more than last year, too. And he's not getting away with it because, pitchers are nibbling. They're trying to keep him, keep pitches out of the zone. And unfortunately, he's going after them. So just this month, I was actually looking today at kind of his batted ball breakdown for May, and 25 of his 35 balls in play have been either pounded into the dirt, negative launch angle, or a launch angle above 40 degrees, which is a fly ball. Now, if some of those leave the park, we can forgive that, certainly, but most of those are not. And it's just poor contact quality on some poor swing decisions.
When you look at some of these Vladdy numbers, it's scary to look at. 7 for 31, batting .226 on the road trip, 1 for 13 against the Twins, no home runs at home, just one homer in his previous 19 games. Yet he's second on the team, just behind Dalton Varsho. We had a guest on yesterday, Scott MacArthur. We were talking about Vladdy and what can be maybe bothering him or on his mind. And I think we landed on the contract situation, right? He's got a year left on his deal. He could be looking for a massive deal, obviously. Do you think that can be weighing on him? Is there a mental part of this to this slump that he's going through right now?
I think that's certainly possible. I mean, if I was in his position, I think it would definitely be weighing on me. I mean, there's a lot of money to be made and a lot of money to potentially be leaving on the table if you're walking into a negotiation not at your best. So, he can look at some of his buddies in other markets. Fernando Tatis, got a huge bag. Ronald Acuna Jr., I believe, is on a big contract now. I don't know how close he is with Wander Franco, but obviously he's another comparable young star who is going to be making a lot of money for a long time. And not that it was necessarily in Vlad's benefit to have signed the dotted line on like a 13-year deal yet, although maybe after 2021 that could have been good. But at this point, I think it probably is something that you could say is weighing on his mind, but we don't know. I doubt that he will speak openly about that, especially during the season. So for now, it's more speculation than anything else. But there's a lot of dollars and cents to be thinking about, and hopefully he can put that aside for the time being.
From Vladdy to Alec Manoah, another issue, obviously big issue. June's almost upon us, though, right? It's time to turn the page and yada yada yada. Fresh starts, new beginnings. We keep hearing about this. Do you think Manoah will be pitching in Toronto throughout June, or is there a stint at some point in AAA?
Yeah, I think he will be in June, still in Toronto, and again, hopefully the rest of the season. Obviously, the hope is the rest of the season, but what I would say to that is just kind of the same thing that I think you would hear elsewhere, which is the Blue Jays don't have a lot of pitching depth behind this current starting five. So Mitch White is hurt still; he's on the mend. Hyunjin Ryu is apparently trying to come back after the All-Star break. That would be interesting to see what that looks like, but of course that's still a little ways away here. So I think it would be really hard to send Manoah down knowing that you don't have a terribly exciting option to replace him with. Now, the other thing here is if somebody in this rotation gets hurt, which knock on wood or buy a rabbit's foot or whatever you need to do in that regard, they've only used 5 starters this year. I'm almost certain they're the only team in baseball that has only used 5 starters. So if an injury necessitates somebody else coming into this rotation, then we'd be forced to see what that looks like. But I don't think the Blue Jays are going to try to push that button unless they absolutely have to.
The trade deadline is, I think, coming up it's February, I believe. With that going on, if you're the Toronto Blue Jays and you're middling around 500 up until that point, what's one move you think they should do?
I think you're in NHL mode there with the February trade deadline projection. I believe August was the answer.
Sorry. February was 2 months ago.
Either way,
I'm all over the map here.
August is the February of the baseball season. So, I would say the biggest move has to be something pitching related. Right. If you're going to take a big swing, that's a starting pitcher. If you're going to take a smaller swing, that's going to be a reliever. And I think almost certainly they should be looking at the relief market very closely because it doesn't always cost much to get those guys. Whereas for starters, you're usually paying a hefty sum. So if, as we approach the trade deadline, the Jays are still in last in an admittedly excellent AL East, they might not do that starting pitcher attempt. Whereas on the relief market, you can kind of nibble at that no matter where you are, as long as you're in contention. So I think in terms of what they have to do, they have to try to look for some pitching help in some regard. But is it a swing man? It's probably not going to be a front end rotation guy because I don't think their minor league system can kind of take that draft capital on, or the trade capital on. But some kind of relief help at the very least, I think, has to be at the top of the list.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, there's nothing to trade with, really, is there, in the minor leagues?
Not much.
And what frustrates Jays fans is you look at Tampa, you look at Baltimore, these incredible systems with talent coming through, and their major league rosters, obviously, incredible as well. At what point do we start pointing fingers at management, saying, okay, you've dealt a lot of capital in the past, and here we are right now, a 500 team?
Yeah, and I don't know if we're going to talk about the Varsho deal, but that's another one that recently is an extremely fresh wound, I think, for fans. But hey, it's so fresh, I don't even know that it's totally fair to be griping about that too much yet because it's very early in Gurriel and Moreno's time in Arizona. But I digress. I think pointing at management, you could certainly do that and be frustrated that some of these trades, Berrios hasn't been quite the bulldog that he was in Minnesota, for example. But at the same time, the Blue Jays haven't bottomed out to the degree, especially of the Orioles, but even of the Rays. The Orioles, how many hundreds lost seasons do you think this Toronto fan base would be able to stomach?
Good point.
Probably not many. And the Orioles went through that. And of course, they got some really exciting young players out of it. But if you don't do that, then it's a lot harder to kind of build your minor league system and kind of build your way up through the draft.
Okay, let's talk about tonight's game. We're talking to Jordan Horrobin of NorthStar Bets. Kikuchi on the mound against the Milwaukee Brewers. What version of Kikuchi do you think we'll see tonight?
Oh my goodness. Well, there's an April version and a May version, right? Yeah. So the April version was a 3.0 ERA, and he was pitching pretty deep into games, and he was striking a lot of guys out. It was very exciting. The May version has not looked good whatsoever. I believe he has a 6.59 or a 6 something ERA in 5 starts in May, and only gotten out of the 5th inning one time. So I would say if I had to guess, I would actually say we'd probably see the April version tonight, just because the Brewers have been so bad against lefties. You could say the worst in baseball against lefties. They have a 30.4% strikeout rate, which is the highest in the league, and just a 0.274 weighted on base average WOBA, which is sort of like an on base percentage, and that's the lowest in the league as well. So they've been terrible against lefties. If Kikuchi is going to bounce back, at home against the Brewers is pretty much the perfect time to do that.
Okay, let's go back on Guerrero Jr. We were just talking about how he really needs to bounce back, but you're not expecting that tonight, according to your article here on NorthStarBets.ca.
No, I'm not, and it's partially just because as he's slumping, I'm riding a trend, taking him under 1.5 bases at -122. But it also has a lot to do with the guy on the mound. And Adrian Hauser, we've only seen him in 4 outings this year, but he's been very good. His past 2 outings, 0 runs allowed. That's over 11.1 innings, and only 6 hits allowed, 5 of which were singles in that span. Not a lot of history between Hauser and Guerrero, but they did face each other last year. And even though it wasn't a good start for Hauser, he held Vladdy hitless in 3 at-bats. So yes, I'm fading Vladdy as I'm trying to inspire some hope for him. Not tonight.
Not tonight, says Jordan Horrobin for Vladdy G. He's got a couple more bets up on NorthStarBets.ca. Go read that article. It's a must read as always. Jordan, thanks for doing this.